Thanks for the invitation. I think I'm talking on the subject of safety, growth, and RHIC, which sounds like a test as to whether I can make a sentence that has all those words in it. I can't make a sentence that has all those words in it, but I can talk to you for about 20 minutes about all of that, and I made some notes here. So actually these things are all related in my mind through the lab's strategic plan for the future. I'll talk a little bit about the role I see for RHIC in that first, then talk about the issues of safety and growth of the lab in the future, and then come back to RHIC at the end of that to see what the one has to do with the other two. So as I've been maybe we talked about this here the last time I came to address this group. I think it was over in Berkner. The lab's strategic plan, which we now prepare sort of annually for the Office of Science, strongly features nuclear physics, study of QCD, and RHIC as one of the legs of that strategic plan. The strategy that supports our future vision is really to try to maintain two major user facilities at the leading edge of their fields, one being RHIC and the other being the light source. The light source, it's pretty clear what the plan is for the future. The future is now. We're now building the replacement for NSLS, and it will be operating in 2014 or 2015. The future for RHIC is, I think, on that time scale, certainly clear. It's the longer term time scale that I think is the feature that I want to talk about right now. So near term, I think about 10 years for RHIC. I know that I see that Steve Vigdor has asked the collaborations for 10-year plans for their work at RHIC. And that seems appropriate given the upgrades that are now going on and both the detector and the machine. And so what we were calling RHIC 2 seems to me where we're going on the time scale of 5 to 10 years. And I'm confident that those decadal plans will produce physics agendas that are compelling through that period. Of course, what we've been talking about for a long time as to what comes next is ERIC, and pleased to see that there's a lot of work going on in the physics department and in the collider accelerator department on R&D, on planning for experiments and making the physics case and so on. And I think that, you know, if in a perfect world, when we are done constructing the light source, we would be building ERIC, a major project, and that would be the mainstay of the QCD program at Brookhaven, at least overlapping with and probably beyond what the RHIC program, the current RHIC program and its current evolution would sustain on its own. So if we really want to be a lab that bases its operations and its science on two major user facilities, to that extent, RHIC is one of the two major elements and so key to the plan. So as I said, ERIC's a major project. That makes it a heavy lift politically and financially. It's probably in the same ballpark as the cost of the light source for the full project. There's an intermediate version of it that's currently being worked on, and even that is $500 million, give or take, based on early cost estimates, including detectors and so on. So this is not like RHIC 2, for which we found CAD found a very clever solution to the luminosity upgrade, and so it's a much more modest scope project than something like ERIC would be. If we want to get there, From my position, I think that requires us to make sure that Brookhaven is the obvious first choice to site that machine when we get to that stage, which will require some endorsement by the community in a few years and a lot of R&D work and some kind of decision as to where to place it if it goes forward. We need to make sure Brookhaven's the obvious place to put it, that it's as well positioned as possible for that site selection. So that means making discretionary investments in the program, the nuclear physics program, as best we can at the laboratory, given its available funds. That means infrastructure, that means LDRD, and some of that's obviously going on, and it has to ramp up and continue to make sure Brookhaven's positioned for that. So a number of things are required in order for Brookhaven to be able to be positioned, to be attractive as the site for RHIC, and to be able to afford the investments needed up front to make that all work. And that's where this thing all connects to both laboratory's growth and safety. So let me just mention growth for a minute, and I'm going to come back to this when I talk about the blueprint project. The lab has some discretionary funds it can use that it pulls out of the funds that come in every year. A lot of it goes into laboratory-directed research and development, the LDRD program. There was a targeted call for LDRD projects in support of RHIC this past call. And the other thing that we do is, we can do with discretionary investments is, target strategic hires, improve the infrastructure, and so on. So those funds are, for the breadth of our program, those funds are pretty constrained every year. We really struggle to fund the highest priority needs to, keep the roofs from leaking. Not always successful at that. Fund innovative projects under LDRD and other ways. There's some royalty money too that we can use. We do that, and so on. There's a lot on the plate between must do and want to do for the future. The only way I can see to pursue the breadth of things I think we have to pursue is to actually grow the lab to a slightly bigger size than it is now in terms of the money that comes in every year and the size of the staff, the scientific staff. The idea behind the blueprint was to develop the lab in certain ways that would enable us to sustain that growth without growing the support of that in proportion, so that we somehow never get out of this cycle of just barely being able to afford what we want to invest in with the available discretionary funds. But I'll come back to that in a minute. Part of the positioning of the laboratory to host big new initiatives has to do with the lab's reputation with the community, with our friends at DOE, and everyone. The lab's reputation as a place that's worth investing money is, you can imagine would be challenged by a situation in which Lab XYZ and Lab BNL compete for the same amount of money, and one of these two has a reputation for getting people hurt or blowing up buildings or wasting its discretionary funds. So the way we conduct our operations, and in particular our safety, is an important factor. Not only the moral imperative of not getting people hurt on site, but the sort of institutional or business imperative of maintaining our reputation as a place where the customer, forgive me for using business terms, where DOE wants to put its money for new initiatives. So I don't know whether this rambling discourse is getting you closer to the idea of how RHIC and the growth of the laboratory and safety are all tied together. They're all tied together through thinking about what's the future of the lab and of RHIC. So now let me turn to some of the issues with regard to safety and operations that caused us over the last couple of months to get very focused, maybe to the apparent exclusion of the Blueprint project, on other issues that seem more pressing. And those have to do with our safety performance and our operational performance. And I just want to know if I need to go through this with you through the list of significant incidents that happened over the last year and a half or so that brought this to the fore. Safety and operational lapses at the laboratory. I know some people in the audience know what I'm talking about, but I want to address the users, so stop me if you've heard this before. Let me put it that way. I'll give you a quick list, and I want people to tell me whether they want more details on it. In October, a year ago October, we had an explosion on site that destroyed a small blockhouse containing a propane-powered backup system for our potable water pumping system. Nobody was hurt in that. Nobody was in the building. It just blew the building to smithereens. And we learned a lot from that, which I'll talk about. We had a fire at the accelerator test facility a few months later, fire in the capacitor bank. An outside subcontractor working on the NSLS2 construction project had a bunch of rebar land on him from a mistake in offloading that stuff that caused a compound fracture to his leg. A rigger working at the RHIC site at building 1005H suffered torn ligaments in his knees from being startled at the sudden release of gas in a venting incident outside building 1005H. And a rad tech working for Brookhaven was overseeing the work of a contractor doing some demolition work in building 801 and fell and got some serious lacerations, and that resulted in stitches from poor housekeeping by the contractor around that site. Does any of that sound familiar to any of you? Does anybody want more details on those? Never heard of it. All heard about it. So what we learned about a number of things there. First, we had a couple of near misses that, while they didn't actually result in injuries, could have killed somebody, that explosion being one. We did actually hurt several people significantly in 3 of those 5 incidents. Required hospitalization in 2 cases and resulted in high-level investigations by the DOE or by us on behalf of the DOE. And we saw cases in which something's missing in our processes, whereby we keep track of the design basis and the configuration of things that we build here, so that things safety systems can get disabled without anybody knowing about it. Not anybody, but the person who's doing the maintenance work on that, and leave things in a condition where an explosion can occur. Something just happened this past week that also had no safety consequences, but could have. People working on, I think, the roof of 1005 over at the RHIC ring, locked out and tagged out the power for the site siren up there, and it never restored power to it for about a month. That the siren was unpowered without anybody knowing it. Some other lapse in communications or configuration control led to what could have been serious if there had been something that needed the siren going on site. So there are plenty of examples of how the lab's processes for either communicating work planning, configuration control, and other similar components of a well-functioning site have fallen into disuse or disrepair. And some of them lead to people getting hurt and going to the hospital. Could have wound up with people going to the morgue as well, I suppose, but thank God that didn't happen. So that all happened over the past year and some, and led us to re-examine, in light of detailed analyses of blowing up the well house, what's going on here, and found fairly broadly across the laboratory, science organizations, support organizations, facilities, laboratories, offices, and everything, evidence of that kind of sort of sloppiness in how we operate, and with the attendant safety consequences. That year was also a year in which we had pretty poor performance as measured by the DOE in terms of injury rates. They were going up after a previous year or so of comparatively lower rates. So one of the major findings out of the investigations into all this is that it's my fault. Me as maybe the representative here of senior management. We've allowed the lab to operate this way. We don't actually live by the relatively good procedures we have, and we don't hold ourselves and anybody else accountable for not living by them. So we developed some processes that, to try to address those things that came under the title of Leadership Action Plan. And so we're in the midst of what's a fairly urgent press to address these issues. A number of people are working on that, and I'm trying to communicate it to people. And I had a meeting with the Management Council last week. I'm meeting with the supervisors next week to try to keep people up to date on what's going on. I think a lot of reaction to this kind of stuff is, well, why does that concern me that some contractor that doesn't even work for Brookhaven got hurt here? Or that some organization on the other side of the site sustained that injury? We're doing fine over here. The message is that if somebody's not doing fine here, none of us are doing fine here, because it goes to the institutional reputation as well as to the injury of our coworkers. So that's why this is not a finger pointing about, the XYZ directorate or the XYZ department is bad. They had somebody get hurt. This is about addressing this across the lab, and you'll find in many of these incidents that in fact it's interdepartment or interdivisional loss of communication that actually is a contributing factor. So we're working on this issue of safety and operational excellence as part of improving the laboratory, which was the purpose of the blueprint, which I have talked to you about in the past. So, and they're actually connected. So I just want to spend a few minutes telling you why we're pursuing both the blueprint and this leadership action plan to try to make the laboratory actually up to the tasks of the future. Remember, maybe you don't remember, but let me say just briefly that the blueprint was a program that I wanted to put in place starting last spring and summer. Also a number of improvement initiatives for the lab, some reorganizational issues, some process improvements that I thought would position us better to sustain growth by allowing us to work more efficiently, so that we could, if we can grow the lab's revenue, we won't also grow the bureaucracy that supports it, but actually create more headroom for investment and growth. That plan had a number of aspects in it that had to do with changing around the organizations of scientific directorates, reorganizing within certain services that are provided at the lab, human resources, safety, financial services, and others, and a number of other changes of that sort that actually pop up again when you look at and do an analysis of why we got in trouble to the extent that we blew up a building or put 2 people in the hospital. So keeping in mind that all those things matter to the institution no matter what corner of the lab they happened in, and noting that they are somehow related to the improvement projects that I have in mind for the laboratory anyway, we've recently decided to try to merge this into a single project, put all these improvement projects together, with the net effect that a lot of them will actually have to be set aside as lower priority. We will focus over the next couple weeks on creating a sort of a project plan for the most important of these tasks, put a lot of the tasks that I have mentioned as being part of the blueprint in the past. Still valuable. Well, some have turned out as we study them not to be so valuable, and they'll just disappear. Others are valuable but probably lower priority than the stuff relating to safety and other improvements and reorganizations that I think really have to have some urgency around them. And so we'll craft out of this rather large set of initiatives that we put together with these 2 projects something manageable and affordable for this year, and then keep pursuing it year by year. So maybe I've already said what I wanted to say about coming back to RHIC, but let me just remind you that RHIC is a key element of the lab's future strategy. RHIC requires us to support it now and to improve the laboratory now so that we actually can capture ERIC as a project for Brookhaven. And that includes a number of things having to do with creating more sort of financial headroom to invest in RHIC and its associated facilities, and to make the lab as good a potential supplier of ERIC to the community as we can by making it efficient as well as safe and high value as viewed from the DOE or any other potential supporter for projects as big as ERIC. Okay, I'm done talking except in response to questions to this. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam. So, questions for Sam?
Brand.
Sam, what role do you envision users having any of the major things that you've just been talking about? I mean, can users have input into how they think the blueprint project should go? And besides working safely and trying to be aware of what's happening, what role can users play in the whole overall process?
Users have a number of obvious roles. One is, as users, they are why we would continue running RHIC or to build its future. So they have an obvious role in making the science case for that and doing the world-class science that's coming out of RHIC right now. Keep doing that. That's all part of the facilities and the lab's standing when it comes to what comes next. You mentioned, and I think this is the next most important thing, to recognize that that the users as individuals are not somehow separate from this issue of the lab's performance. I mean, they obviously depend on the lab being here, so they have a stake in us performing well. But it would be best, I think, if users adopted the opinion or the approach to the lab where that was somehow more a part of their thinking. In other words, they need to care about how well we do our job and in supplying the facilities and in running the laboratory, so that when I ask people for input and suggestions, ideas, and critiques of what we're doing, I'm happy to hear from users on all those subjects. A lot of the things that you try to do when planning big initiatives for the future is to create unintended consequences. Some of those are more apparent to users probably than to employees. They access the lab and its facilities in a different way, and on a different duty cycle and with different needs, and so they probably have something independent and valuable to contribute to explaining what's wrong with or what's right with anything we put on the table. So I certainly am interested in what the users think, and I tend to hear about it through the users executive committee, but maybe I'm asking for the users executive committee to think about this topic of how the lab gets to the point where it can continue to provide the resources that they're here to use, make that more of a topic for the users executive committee.
Specific issue we visited today, we've been visiting for 10 years, is better lighting on the way out to the We've been told repeatedly year after year after year that it's a very low priority, there's not enough people involved,
Right.
it costs too much money. And so here's a constant repeated input from the user community to the laboratory that's falling on deaf ears.
It's not deaf ears. I would contest only that last statement. Good. Have people stopped shivering in here yet? Those issues come up every year, and it's part of this business I was talking about earlier about us having a scope and a budget that doesn't quite give us the ability to address everything. We have a tremendous backlog of maintenance and stuff that needs to be addressed. And it's typical that only the highest priority stuff gets done, and there's a ranking system. I don't think I'm not really happy with that whole system. I think it could be done better with more attention to strategic outcomes, and if strategic outcomes were somehow on the scoring system, I think things that relate to RHIC would rise higher than they do. So it's not because this thing has been that no one's hearing it. It's that no one's able to answer with the available resources. And you're certainly not alone. RHIC is not alone this user community is not alone in not getting all of its needs met. There are lots of acknowledged but unfulfilled safety suggestions and other improvement suggestions or mandates from reviews and so on that we just have trouble putting resources in place to do all of. So every year is really more like triage than anything else. Mike.
What you just said sounds exactly what the former director said about the reactor pool. They had to treat it for years, and they always said, we should fix it, we will fix it. It never got fixed because it wasn't as serious from a scientific point of view. But do you now evaluate all these things, as you said, from people looking outside, or from safety, or from lab, as you said, alignment with the lab goals, not just we don't have to fix that leak because it doesn't harm anybody?
The answer is yes to that. There's actually a process that's captured in our lab procedures in SBMS for the locals for how you evaluate things like that. I think part of our problem, along with the general theme from earlier of having good processes and then not using them appropriately, that's one that I think is very good. In fact, it's kind of a model in the DOE system, but we're guilty of not actually exercising it regularly. It should come up all the time, and people tend to make decisions that are not in that framework. So that's an issue. And of course, hindsight's perfect. So, but yeah, I'm not surprised that I'm saying things that sound like ones that bit some other poor director in the past, and it'll probably happen to me in the future. That's the trouble with being unable to do everything, because you can never do everything, is that some things you didn't do turn out to be worse than you thought. Paul.
Just curious about, say,
hold on one second. I'm not sure whether people on the phone have been able to hear what people are asking me from the audience. Should I be repeating this stuff? Oh, okay, and it's webcast. Okay, go ahead.
How is one to know whether things are good or bad? How do you judge this? Right? So you say, well, you describe 5, say, fairly serious accidents in the last year and a half. That sounds high to me, but how is one to know? What is the sort of? It's an industrial site. There's industrial things going on. If you said you wanted 0 accidents in 100 years, that doesn't sound reasonable. So somehow. How is the laboratory relative to sort of general industrial standards or other laboratories?
Last year, relative to other laboratories, so I'm being asked, how do you measure what's good or what's improved vis-a-vis our serious incidents over the last year or so? I can give you quantitatively how we stand relative to other laboratories on the basis of the injury rates that the labs have traditionally reported to the Department of Energy every year. Last year we were the worst of the 10 science labs in injury statistics here. And the knee-jerk reaction is, oh, those other bastards at Oak Ridge aren't actually reporting the numbers or whatever. It's everybody's reaction when they hear that they're not doing well, is that the other guys are cheating. I actually don't believe that's true. It could be that there's underreporting at other places. And in fact, recently at Brookhaven, what I consider to be a healthy sign, there's been more reporting of minor incident, first aid cases or situations that didn't result in injury. There's more of that in the system. That data is very valuable because it actually helps you look at your processes before somebody's in the hospital and you're forced to look at your processes, if you know what I mean. With regard to the industrial world, if you try to look at companies that are best in class and do laboratory or production work, chemical industries and other construction industries and so on, the best in class are typically a factor of 10 better than the mean of the DOE labs. So you can argue, we're doing research. Everything's a new thing. There's not over and over again the same. And I think there's some validity in that. But a factor of 10, I think, is hard to explain. And if you want to be best in class sort of worldwide, we're a factor of 10 away from that. And if you want to be best in class in the Department of Energy, Brookhaven is about a factor of 2 or 3 away from that. So that's what I can tell you. Other questions or comments?
Today, they've also discussed users getting a little bit, having input into Brookhaven's emergency planning. And that was prompted by a recent snowstorm where we had users that were here and couldn't get out and didn't have shovels. And then, what happens if we have a hurricane or a tornado? And what are users supposed to do? So they have requested that they become part of Brookhaven's planning process when we look at how we do an evacuation or how would we address users, and are we doing the same thing for employees that we're doing are we doing the same thing for users as we are doing for employees?
Okay, so the comment is about the role of users in emergency planning, and the example of the recent blizzard was cited. And I think that's a really good suggestion. And I will talk to the head of the emergency management group.
Jim Swinsky already had
He's done it. And
With Mike Penna?
with
Lenny Bates.
Lanny Bates.
Okay, well, Mike reports to him, and I would think we should get the emergency planning folks involved. The lab is still in the process of improving its emergency planning procedures, where we made big strides against DOE's expectations over the last couple of years. We started from a not so good place in that area, but have improved a lot and have gotten reasonably good recognition for that from the DOE. But this is an area which sounds like it's underattended to.
Well, and my comment would be that RHIC is not the only user facility
Sure.
here, that the laboratory should invite the light source into that process.
RHIC and the light source. I agree. So if Jim's talked to to Lanny. I'd like to know what the result of that was, and then I'd like to pursue it further. Okay.
So maybe something that you might appreciate, so that is, particularly with the contractors, that the perception. So one of my neighbors is actually a contractor. He said he had bid on some project around here and got number 2. And number 1 didn't make some cut in terms of safety standards or something like that, so he got the job eventually. And he told me, wow, I've never seen something like this. We have to go through this training class and whatnot. And I never appreciated that, how, like, what stuff I can just do to make things better. So he was really, he said, wow, this is a really great place. Like you guys have a very safe environment. So, the thing with the contractors, I think you have, like you're running open doors when you just require them to adhere to all the standards. And even if they seem, like unsurmountable, I think in the end they will come into line.
So this was a comment about contractors and safety, and I just in regard to the case you mentioned just now with somebody not making the grade here on site, I'll tell you what happened. The last of the incidents I mentioned to you, where a rad tech fell down, got badly lacerated in a pile of sheet metal from a demolition job that a contractor was doing, that led to a stand down of, I think, 30 on-site active contracts with outside vendors, not including the Light Source 2, because it was already had a stand down for that broken leg I told you about. Everybody else was stood down for a period of days, and the projects were walked down, and meetings were held with the heads of those contracting companies, and one out of that group just didn't get it, as the saying goes, and they were fired. That's why there was suddenly work available for your neighbor to come in and compete for. It's a good opportunity to remind people that, we actually had a contractor killed on site. I think it was 1996. Construction worker. By the way, the local construction industry standards are not the world-class standards I was talking to Paul about a minute ago. People who come on site from local companies can't believe this safety rigor on site, and many of them actually wind up leaving the job because their boss got rid of them when we complained about, walking on the roof without fall protection. A guy almost sawed his leg off at the CFN 2 or 3 years ago and had to be helicoptered out of here, and so on. So the local standards are low compared to what we're demanding, and so. But it's important to keep contractors in mind. There's a strong tendency all through the organization to say, that's not us, that's some jerk from outside the lab, and our responsibility goes on the books for us, just like an employee or a user getting hurt on site. Other questions on this fascinating topic? Yeah, no, Tom.
I could change the topic a little bit.
Okay.
Sam, I know you're among the leaders of a forum where the lab directors meet regularly with the Secretary of Energy.
Yes.
And I'm wondering if you could say a few words from that perspective. We're now like a year into the new administration. I know there was a lot of talk about changes in priorities and science. How is that going with regard to science that you're interested in?
That's a really good question regarding Brookhaven's science portfolio and the new administration's approach. I mean, it goes beyond science portfolio too, because the new Secretary of Energy is also on a crusade with regard to how the labs interact administratively and compliance-wise with the Department of Energy. I think it's obvious to everybody that Secretary Chu is all about energy research and climate research. I think although we're not big in this area, we have a lot of assets that and have started actually to pull them together in advance of his taking over, that I think will serve us well in growing that part of the program. So part of our reorganization under the blueprint was to put together climate and environmental science and biology in one directorate, and to put together commercialization and applied science together in another one. And I think that will enable us not only to respond to the Secretary of Energy, but also to grow programs here in more applied areas that would involve industrial support or other non-DOE support or non-Office of Science support. So working for others, I think, is a growth area that is something that the lab has the room to grow in and could also help the general growth of the laboratory. When you come to particle and nuclear physics, I don't see a lot of advocacy for that in the hierarchy of the Department of Energy. The secretary is an atomic physicist. There's a deputy secretary who's a nuclear physicist, but he's a theorist, and so that's a half a point you get for that. You go down to the head of the Office of Science as a condensed matter physicist, and you go down to the principal deputy for programs, which is Pat Damer. Also, well, she's an Argonne alumna, but from the days when they actually did that kind of physics there, but it's not her physics. Also an atomic physicist. So I worry about this, frankly. I worry about the support for what we do. I mean, it's featured in all the mission statements of the Department of Energy, you know, discovery-based fundamental research. But you can worry about its long-term support. High-energy physics in particular, I think we're in the process of a fire sale on that subject, and I can unfortunately foresee a time when we won't be in that business nationally. It doesn't have to go that way, but a lot of science point in that direction. Long baseline neutrinos and so on notwithstanding. I mean, if we don't get our act together there, the Japanese will eat our lunch on that subject too. So I worry. Nuclear physics is I have a different worry about nuclear physics. Here's something that the RHIC and AGS users group can think about. I think the future of nuclear physics is the direction we're going in. QCD is nuclear physics, as far as I'm concerned. And I think RHIC adds a lot to what we've done at RHIC to make a program for that could have a long time frame. But I don't see beyond that time frame. I don't know if anybody's thinking beyond that time frame. I don't know where nuclear physics goes after that as a science, never mind the money. So how should we be positioning ourselves to support nuclear physics really long term as you know, a core value of Brookhaven and part of our research agenda? I've talked to bunches of people about this, including the former head of the Office of Nuclear Physics, and I don't get that anybody's focused enough on this subject. So where's it going? I think we could build ourselves along the lines from my rant of a few minutes ago, a 20-year or more future in that field, in the forefront of that field. But maybe that's it, and I'll be dead by then, so what do I care? But I think that I worry about the laboratory as having a future that's dependent on two big facilities, one in an area where it's less clear to me than the other what the long-term future is. Mike.
That's an interesting point. I worry about that too, although not the same way that you do. I mean, like high-energy physics is virtually wiped out from local things to do it by all the new labs. 200 whether you do something, you are doing something else like us, or on the way to doing something else like Fermi.
Fermilab's going to do like we would have done if we had been let to do it, right?
We're doing our program.
Right, that's what I mean.
My point is, I think, why is Brookhaven Lab here in the first place, right? The reason, I mean, the good answer was rhetorical.
I knew that. Somehow I knew that.
It's because the people back in the 40s wanted, all the university people wanted big facilities to be able to do the most modern science.
Right.
And I think
Right.
That we're going to need 20 years out. Obviously, if you need a facility 20 years out that nobody ever did before, it's a big deal. You know, right?
Yeah.
You probably couldn't even predict it, but I think that just has to be someday. I mean, again, everything's so stovepipe in these communities. It's that. EPAC and whatever, I'm not sure that alone can solve the problem.
Well, you made an interesting, well, many interesting points, but the one I want to touch on is the one about what labs are for. I think that's exactly right. We're here to supply, you know, top of the line facilities that no university or group of universities can build. And so as a laboratory, we need to be responsive to what the user communities want and need. I was addressing the question earlier more narrowly from what does nuclear physics want? And maybe it's not in the mix, you know, 20 or 30 years from now. I don't know. I think the lab has great assets that can cope with that 20 or 30 years from now if we think about it in advance. But you know, just because of my, you know, tendency towards nuclear and particle physics, I worry about us, you know, about the end of that. That's all.
We can also, I mean, I think that should also be studied, right?
Right.
People, who's thinking about that besides, you know, people like you who are worried about your lab? I mean, what are all the profs doing? I mean, everything I heard about, we're talking now, as you know, about what are we going to do with RHIC.
Right.
Most people are not thinking creatively. They're saying, well, you know, because, you know, I'll do some experiment somewhere else. In my mind, you know, they're not, that's the attitude of most university people, but maybe there is no somewhere else. 20 years.
Right. Well, I hope that's not an adequate characterization of what the user community is thinking, because, you know, that's one way of looking at it, right? It's a two-way street. We're here to respond to the user community, right? So what do you want to do? Well, what I want to do is go somewhere where I can do what I'm doing right now if you won't give it to me at Brookhaven. That's not a responsive answer. That doesn't help them or us get to the future, right? Yeah. I'm agreeing with you. We're pretty far afield from even my three-word title, so.
On that chirpy